What I'm going to speak about is what I think is going on in the elections. And in order to really understand that, you have to know, in order to understand this, we have to talk about a lot of hashkafa to inform you people of the principles over here. So I'm going to start now. I hope everyone can hear me and so on. The essential thing that I want to talk about today is the very important concept, which I don't think I've ever spoken before. It's the concept of the Mata of Moshe Rabbeinu. And there's a lot about that is not really much is known and so on. So I'm going to go into that and speak about the concept of the Mata of Moshe Rabbeinu, the Erev Rav, and the concept of the Shrin and Golus. These are three different topics that really can be combined into one topic. Again, there's the Mata, Moshe Rabbeinu and his Mata, the staff that he had. There's also the concept of the Erev Rav, and it's the Golus of the Erev Rav. And finally, there's the concept of the Golus of the Shechina. And all of this has to be better clearly understood to understand, why possibly the election result turned into something, for this case, for Biden, and what can we expect in the future. So let me first start with this. First of all, the concept of the Mata of Moshe Rabbeinu. What exactly is the Mata of Moshe Rabbeinu and so on? It was a staff that he used to do some of the makas. So the makas were performed by Moshe Rabbeinu using his staff. And these were the makas that were used to free the Jewish people from Egypt and so on and so forth. But exactly what is that, and where is that mentioned? Well, the Mata of Moshe Rabbeinu was first mentioned, really, we see it basically mentioned by the burning bush. When Moshe Rabbeinu came to the burning bush, the Rabbeinu Shem had a conversation with him and started saying certain things. And he said to Moshe Rabbeinu about the Mata that he was carrying. It was a staff that he was carrying. And the Rabbeinu Shem said to Moshe Rabbeinu, take the staff and throw it on the ground. And then when he did that, the staff suddenly turned into a snake. Then the Rabbeinu Shem said, pick up the snake, and he did that, and suddenly the snake turned back into a Mata. And exactly what was the Rabbeinu Shem telling Moshe Rabbeinu with this event? Basically, the Rabbeinu Shem was saying to Moshe Rabbeinu that the entire world, the spiritual status of the entire world, where it's holding in terms of the Gula, and where it's holding in terms of the Meshiac, is symbolized in the staff. Because when the staff is in the form of a snake, that means that the world is in the status of a chait, that the world is in the spiritual status of degradation and in the aspect of a snake. And then when the staff is again returned to its former position as a staff, and it exists as a staff, not as a snake, so the world is in the spiritual status of a geula, and so on and so forth. So therefore, the staff represents the spiritual status of the world, the madrega of the entire bria, with respect to the possibility of the geula, the Meshiac. This is the concept of what the Rabbeinu Shem told Moshe Rabbeinu. And he said to him, since you threw the staff down and became a snake, and then you picked it up, and it became a staff again, that's a simon that the world is in the madrega, the world is in the status of a geula. And therefore, it's possible for you to bring the geula, because I'm assigning you to be the Meshiach, the Meshiach ben Yosef, to bring the geula to Klal Yisrael. So he told Moshe that the symbol of this privilege was the fact that the staff retained its tzura as a staff and did not become a snake, and therefore the world is now in the status of the geula. We find therefore that after this that Moshe Rabbeinu, when he went to Egypt, he told Paroi. What did he tell Paroi? He did not tell Paroi to let my people go, and in a certain way was asking his permission. Moshe Rabbeinu did not ask Paroi for his permission to let my people go. Many people think that's what Moshe Rabbeinu, that the conflict between Moshe Rabbeinu and Paroi was that Moshe Rabbeinu was requesting the permission of Paroi to let this happen. This is completely untrue. What Moshe Rabbeinu was doing was he's saying to Paroi that you cannot hold the Jewish people in terms of a golus. Your ability to hold the Jewish people in golus, what you've been doing for many, many years now, has to do with the fact that the status of the spiritual status of the world was in the category of a snake. So that symbolized that the world was in the category of a golus, and therefore you had the power to keep them in golus because of this. But now I'm telling you that this is no longer the status of the world, and therefore you have to let them go. Either one way or another, the Jews will be able to go out, because if you don't let them go by your will, I will force them to come out by bringing certain plagues on Egypt. And the way I'm demonstrating to you that the spiritual status of the world is in the category of a gula, is that I'm going to take my staff, Moshe Rabbeinu said, my staff, and I'm going to throw it onto the ground, and it's going to suddenly become a snake. And when he did that, it became a snake. The sorcerers, the astrologers and the sorcerers of Egypt said, well, we're not impressed by this. We're not impressed by this because we can do the same thing. And they took their staffs, and they threw it down, and it also became a snake. But the difference was this, that the staff of Moshe Rabbeinu became a snake, and his snake was able to eat up, to engorge himself on all the other snakes, and literally he absorbed this possibility of eating all the snakes, and therefore he captured all these snakes from the staffs of Egypt. And then he picked up the staff, it's the snake itself, which was his staff, and he restored it to being a staff. So he demonstrated to Paroi that when he converted his staff into a snake, his staff as a snake was able to feed and eat up all the other snakes of the staffs of the sorcerers of Egypt. And then he picked up a staff and it became a staff again, indicating that now the spiritual status of the universe, of the world, was one of Geula. And therefore, the ability of Paroi to ensure that the Jewish people would remain in Golus is over. And therefore, he has to allow the Jewish people to go. The question is, what exactly is this situation with the staff? We're trying to understand exactly what is the staff and so on, and where do we see this relationship between the staff and Moshe Rabbeinu? Because when Moshe Rabbeinu came to Yisro and the Amalekim were starting to disturb the daughters of Yisro, Moshe Rabbeinu suddenly grabbed the staff, which was in a stone, and then freed it, and then he assaulted the Egyptians, and he allowed the daughters of Yisro to go free. But where was the staff? Actually, when Moshe came to Yisro, he heard that there was a staff in a rock, in a stone. It was buried inside of a stone, and nobody was able to release it. This was a very strange event because it should have been difficult to release the staff from the position of being locked in a stone. But this staff that was in the stone was the ultimate staff that Moshe Rabbeinu, when he went to the stone, he released the staff from the stone and freed it. And then he was able to use it against the Amalekim. What exactly does this mean? This means that this was not a regular staff. This was a very unusual instrument of the Geula itself. What exactly was it? It contained the energy, and I will explain this soon. It contained the energy which enabled Moshe Rabbeinu to bring the Geula. That energy is contained in the Shemus there's a certain shame that was on the staff, and it was contained in that shame the energy to bring the Geula. And this energy was locked up in a stone. But the unique property of the staff was that it suddenly recognized Moshe Rabbeinu. In other words, it wasn't that Moshe Rabbeinu acquired the staff by his choice. He acquired the staff because the staff recognized him as the one who owns it, the one who has access to the power of the Geula is the Meshiach. And this staff, therefore, normally it really responds to the person that it sees as the Meshiach. And therefore, it let itself be freed in the stone. This is a very unusual thing, where we see like the staff is like a magic wand, and the magic wand actually recognizes the person who can free it from captivity in a stone, and suddenly allows that person to use it in terms of all the energy. This was the godless of the staff itself, of the staff of Moshe Rabbeinu. It was a magical staff whose energy was able to be used to bring the Geula of the Jews in Mitzrayim, and also it's the energy that brings the Geula in the end, and I'll speak about this later. But Moshe Rabbeinu was able to take it out of the stone because the staff recognized him as the Meshiach. He had the energy of the Meshiach, and the staff recognized that, and therefore the staff chose him as the one person who can free it. It's a strange thing because this story of the staff and the stone in certain ways was taken over by the Goyim. There's a famous legend of, I don't know if you've heard it, probably you have, there's a legend of King Arthur. And King Arthur was a legend that was created, I think, by some Mallory, Sir Edmund Mallory. I think he created that legend, and he wrote the book of Arthur. And the thing was that they said that the one who will be the king of England, this was, I think, in the 6th or 7th century ACE. What happened was when King Arthur was just a boy, and before he was king, he once saw a sword stuck in a stone. And the legend was that whoever can free this sword from the stone would become the future king of England. And as the king of England, he will be able to elevate England to a messianic status, and therefore he was able to construct it, so he built Camelot. Camelot was really an organization of knights that they brought a certain messianic fervor to the country of England. This legend is about King Arthur, of course, who has nothing really to do with Judaism and so on. But this legend of the sword and the stone was actually taken from the Jewish Medrash, which talks about the staff in the stone that Moshe Rabbeinu freed. So therefore we see that this concept of a sword and a stone as recognized who will be the future king of England, or in our case, who will be the Moshiach that will redeem Klal Yisrael, is a legend based on the Midrashim, and the Goyim actually use that in one of their legends itself. Now, what we want to understand is exactly what is that staff? What does that staff really represent? We see that staff has magical powers. And we question what the staff represents. And the truth of the matter is, the ultimate power of the Meshiach is represented in what? And that's represented in the staff itself. The power of the Meshiach, in both Meshiach, and especially the Meshiach ben Yosef, is the fact that he has a certain light of Torah. His knowledge of Torah is different than any other human being that was ever made. Because his light of Torah was composed of 50 gates. The Torah is said to be in 50 different madrigas, or 50 gates. The 50th gate is a gate which is above the other 49. The first 49 gates, or sha'orim, to the Torah, is the Torah that we possess, and is the Torah that goes all the way up to the highest madriga. But starting from the 50th gate, that Torah is actually called the light of Mashiach. It's a certain madrega of Torah where suddenly when you learn that Torah, you are able to see things never before seen by mankind. That is called the 50th gate, the Torah. of the 50th gate, and that is called the Or of Moshiach, and so on. And the staff of Moshe Rabbeinu represents that 50th gate. That's really the light of the sphere of Bina, which is beyond the 49 gates of the 7 spheres before it. But the light of the 50th gate is the light of Mashiach. What's the difference between the light of Mashiach and what do you call it, and all the other madrigas of Torah? That's because if you understand the light of Mashiach, you're on the 50th level, and there was no one ever able to reach that level except one person, and that was Rabbi Akiva ben Yosef, who actually became a Mashiach. But actually, this was the story in of itself. But no one has ever reached that light. That light has remained in the Shemayim by other Mauritian who was supposed to get that light if he would have done the mitzvah. And that was the light that he was supposed to bring down. And by bringing down that light, he would then take that light, and that would be makar of him to such a madrega where he suddenly would be able to mezachach the bria and bring madrega v'olam haba. It's the light of Meshiach which enables other Mauritian to convert the physical universe into the madrega of olam haba. Because the madrega of olam haba is when suddenly you have an answer to every question that you want to ask about your life. If you want to ask why you have certain friends, or who your wife is, or who your children are, why you live in a certain place, if you want to ask every question that you have about your life, you will have the answer to that question if you have the light of Mashiach. It is with that light that the Mashiach will be able to answer every question that will ever be asked of him about why God did see these things that he did in human history. The time, the reason why God performed every event in human history is contained in that light, the light of the 50th gate. And the Mashiach, who in the end will possess that light, will therefore know all that information. That's why when Chazal talk about the Mashiach, the madreg of the madreg of the Mashiach is such that he will be higher than Malachim. It says in the Pasuk in a Yaskalavi that the Mashiach will become wise. What does that mean? He will leave his golus, and then he will rise. He will rise and become great and greater. On the first Madrega, which is called V'yoram, V'nosa V'gova Miyoid. On the first Madrega of V'yoram, he's as great as Avraham Avinu in Chochmah. On the second Madrega, a higher Madrega, which is V'nosa, and he shall be carried, he then becomes as great as Moshe Rabbeinu in Chochmah. And finally, on the third Madrega, which is beyond Moshe Rabbeinu, therefore it says, V'gova Miyoid, he is as great as the Malachim. He is greater as a human being while he's alive in the world, in this world. He is greater than the Malachi Ashoros, the highest Malachim of all in the Shemayim, and he is greater than all in Chochmah. Why? Because he possesses the light of the 50th gate and higher, and that light is symbolized by the Mata of Moshe Rabbeinu. Because the instant question was, why did Moshe Rabbeinu went to Har Sinai with Klal Yisrael to receive the Torah? What exactly was Moshe Rabbeinu supposed to receive the Torah? Moshe was already the greatest Navi of all. Like the Torah says that there was no greater Navi than Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was able to have his Nevuah while he was awake. And therefore he was actually able proactively to ask the Banachim any question he wanted and receive an answer. He was the greatest Navi of all time, and there will never be a greater Navi. So therefore, what was it about the Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu needed? If he was also the biggest Chacham and the biggest Navi of all, why did he have to take the Torah from Sinai? You can say because he wanted to bring the Klal Yisrael, but that's not true. He wanted that Torah for himself. What was it in the Torah that he was supposed to bring down from Har Sinai that he felt that he needed to get? And the answer is the 50th gate. Because Moshe Rabbeinu only had 49 gates. He never had the 50th gate because when he took the Jews out of Egypt, he didn't yet get to Har Sinai. But when he got to Har Sinai, he reached the 50th level. Now, does that mean that Moshe Rabbeinu finally became the Moshiach? Yes and no. When he reached the 50th level, he lost it suddenly at the same time. Why did he lose it? How did he lose it, and so on? And he never regained it. Only after he died was he given permission to metapel, to be associated with the 50th gate. But while he was alive, he never had the 50th gate again. How can Moshe Rabbeinu lose it? And that's what the Rebbeinu Shem meant by at Har Sinai, when the Rebbeinu Shem said, because of the sin of the golden calf, the chet of the egel, which was done by the Erev Rav. Therefore, the Rebbeinu Shem said to Moshe Rabbeinu, go down, lech raid, ki shecheses amacha, because your nation has corrupted themselves. And when the Rebbeinu Shem said go down, he didn't mean go down from the mountain or from Sinai. He meant you have to go down in your madrega, because you cannot acquire the 50th gate now that the Jews have sinned with the golden calf and so on. And the reason for this has to do with the Erev Rav. The Erev Rav was able to convince Klal Yisrael that they had to replace Moshe Rabbeinu, who they thought died up on the mountain, with the golden calf that would represent the energy of the Mashiach ben Yosef. They were able to construct an Avodah Zorah from the Mashiach, the Avodah Zorah of the Egel Hazov, to represent Moshe Rabbeinu. In actuality, this is not really an Avodah Zorah. There's a big shaila that the question about that, if the Egel Hazor was an Avodah Zorah. And the truth of the matter is, it was not an Avodah Zorah. It was considered an Avodah Zorah only in a certain degree, but it was not the same thing as the normal Avodah Zorah. Normal Avodah Zorah is when the people worship the stars, the mazolos. The akum, the goy means Avodas Kochavim Mazolos. Avodah Zorah is based on the mazolos, the worship of the stars, the planets, like Mars and Jupiter and Saturn and so on. The 7 planets in heaven are considered the mazolos, and the ancient man worshipped them. Not only ancient man, but even modern day man used to worship them as gods, that they had power, and there's a certain basis for that, in fact, because it says that the Rebbeinu Shem brings down his energies through the spheres, and from the spheres they come down to the world through the planets. So somehow the ancients knew this, and they created a method which is called Avodah Zorah, in which they can access this energy, and they can have things happen to them. For example, if they wanted to win a war, they would worship the planet Mars, which is considered the god of war to them, and therefore they would access the ability to suddenly be victorious in the war. So Avodah Zorah is a certain way to capture the energy of the mazolos and use that energy at will, at your own will. Of course, this is a belief in the planets themselves, that some of the planets have an independent energy of the Rebbeinu Shem, that maybe the Rebbeinu Shem gave the koyach to the stars, but now that he gave it to them, they no longer possess it. They only possess it because the Rebbeinu Shem gave it to them. But now the Rebbeinu Shem leaves them, and they're independent on their own, and therefore they have access to these energies, which is the energies of Avodah Zorah, by worshiping the planets. And I'm not going to go into this. It's a very deep thing and so on, how they did this and so on and so forth, in terms of what this was. So because the Erev Rav influenced Klal Yisrael to worship the golden calf, they actually prevented the Geula. Because if Moshe Rabbeinu had received the 50th gate, which was when Moshe Rabbeinu received the 50th gate, which was the Or of Mashiach, he then became Meshiac. He would have become Meshiac, and that would have been the Geula itself. Actually, very few people understand this, but Klal Yisrael was supposed to then go on with the avoid of going into Eretz Yisrael, and that would have been the Yemos Mashiach. It was the kavana of the Rebbeinu Shem. It was the intention of God to bring the Yemos of Mashiach by the time that Moshe Rabbeinu went up to the Shemayim to receive the Torah. That was supposed to be the Yemos Mashiach. And then the Jews would have gone to Eretz Yisrael, and the Yemos Mashiach would have started at that time. So the whole tachlis of Klal Yisrael worshiping the 50th gate was really the concept of Klal Yisrael keeping the Taryag mitzvahs. Klal Yisrael the Jewish people were supposed to keep the Taryag mitzvahs in the Yemos Mashiach, and from there, that would have slowly gone to the Madrega of Zichuch, where the world would have turned into Olam Haba. So it was not the intention of the Rebbeinu Shalom to give the Taryag mitzvahs of where the Jewish people were not in the Moshiach. Few people know this. But Moshe Rabbeinu was supposed to be the Meshiach himself. He was supposed to initiate the Messianic period. That was supposed to be the Meshiach, and that was the Torah that Klal Yisrael was given in the 50th gate in the form of Taryag mitzvahs. I'm not going to go further into that, but that's really what happened then, and so on and so forth. But because of what the Erev Rav did, the Erev Rav were people who were descendants from Egypt. The Erev Rav is called the mixed multitude, and these are people who went out with the Jews as they went out from Egypt. As Egypt let them go, there were many Egyptians who went along with the Jews to go to Mount Sinai and receive the Torah, because there were many Egyptians who actually believed in God because they saw the power of God with what Moshe Rabbeinu did to Egypt by the plagues. So therefore they decided to join the Jewish people as well. These people are called the mixed multitude, or the Erev Rav. And when they got to Har Sinai, they convinced the people that Moshe Rabbeinu died. He was dead on the mountain of Sinai. And they convinced the Jewish people to have his energy, the energy of Mashiach, characterized by worshiping a certain idol, which is called the golden calf. And then that Mashiach would become the Avodah Zarah. And therefore, because of what they did, and they convinced Klal Yisrael to go along with that, what happened was that they lost the ability to bring the Geula. And God was very angry at them and said to them that in the end of time, you see, now this is something which is a very deep secret and so on, but God said at the end of time, Klal Yisrael will be in a Golus. The first Golus of Klal Yisrael was Babylonia, which destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. The second Golus, the second exile of the Jewish people, was Persia, and that was a story of Purim. The third Golus of Klal Yisrael was the Greece, and that was in the period of Alexander the Great and the story of Hanukkah. The fourth Golus is the greatest Golus of all, and it's different than the other three exiles. The fourth Golus is called the Golus of Edom, or the Golus of Esav, and that's the Golus of Rome. And that was converted into the Golus of Christianity. We are now in the Golus of Christianity, which is really who Esav is today. The Christians took over the Holy Roman Empire, which were Catholics, and they took over the Roman Empire and they became Christians. So Christianity is the last Golus of Klal Yisrael. Now, after that, there was one more Golus called the Erev Rav, and God said to the Erev Rav, I will use you in the end of time, and I will let you come back to the world, and you will again capture Klal Yisrael and so on. Now, what's the reason that he did this? Is a very deep reason and so on. And I'm going to explain what that is and so on, what the Golus of the Erev Rav is, because this pertains to the Golus, the final Golus of the matter itself. The pasuk says, there's a pasuk that says, "Ani Hashem v'itach ishena." God, when He describes the Geula, when He describes the actual when He will bring the Mashiach, He says that He will bring the Mashiach either one of two ways, either biachishena, hastily, He will bring it as quickly as possible, or He will bring it beita, in its time. And this describes two different ways God will bring the redemption. The Jews will be zocher, they will be worthy of the redemption, the final redemption, either one of two ways. Either they will be zocher to the redemption, biachishena, means He will speed up the Golus and bring it at any time. If the Jews keep the Torah or do tshuva, then the Jewish people will suddenly be zocher to the Yemos Moshiach by their tshuva. When could this happen? It could happen at any time. Any time in human history, the Jews can bring the Yemos Moshiach. And from the Yemos Moshiach, from that point will start the beginning of the Messianic period, which will lead into the period called Olam Haba, which is a change in the universe, completely a changed universe, which is a change in time and space. In Olam Haba, in the future world, there is no time and there's no space. And that's a world which beyond time will last forever. And this world called Olam Haba will exist after the they will exist after the Yemos Mashiach. The Yemos Mashiach is kind of an introduction to it. I'm not going to really go on and explain why there's the Yemos Mashiach, but that's the period which exists before Olam Haba. Now God said, therefore, that if the Jews do tshuva and so on, they will be worthy suddenly of bringing the Meshiach and bringing the Gula. And that can happen any time in history. From Adam Arishon, from the next door of Cain and Havel down until our generation itself, it is possible to bring the Gula, the redemption, if the Jews keep the Torah and they do tshuva on the fact that they do sins. But what happens if the Jews do not keep the Torah and do not do tshuva? They remain basically as they are sinners. In that case, then there was a limited possibility of bringing the Gula. The redemption then will occur at a certain time. There's a certain period, there's a certain date. Nobody knows that date except two people. It was revealed to Yaakov, Jacob, the patriarch, and was also revealed to Daniel, the prophet. And that is a date when, by that date, the Meshiach must arrive, even if the Jews do not do tshuva on their own. The Jews must arrive, and the Jews must receive the Meshiach. So therefore, God says that I can bring the Meshiach at any time in human history if the Jews are worthy of it. But if the Jews are not worthy because they don't do repentance, they don't repent, or they don't keep the Torah, but I could still bring the Meshiach, but in that case, I can bring the Meshiach only by a certain date. And that date is called the Kates. The word Kates means final end, termination point. There is a termination point to human history. And that termination point is a point that the Meshiach must come and it must start the Yemos Mashiach. That termination date means what? That the 50th gate will be revealed. Because the 50th gate is only revealed to the Meshiach, who then reveals it to all of the Jewish people. And if the Jews are not worthy of that light, the 50th gate, at any time in human history, by keeping the Torah, they can still be worthy of it because there's a certain date which cannot pass. It must happen by that. And I'd like to explain what that means. What does it mean that the Mashiach must arrive by a certain date? What does that mean? Exactly, if the Jews are not worthy of it because they're not doing repentance, they're not repenting for their sins, then how is it possible for the Jews to be worthy? That's the question. It's a very serious question. So many of the commentaries say that Jews have to do tshuva, but that's not really true. Even if the Jews don't do tshuva, this date will pass and the Mashiach will come by that date. How is this possible? So there's a very certain principle that a lot of people don't know, and which basically is the engine of human history. Why is it that the Mashiach doesn't come? What prevents the Mashiach from coming? And the answer is, does it have to do with the level of the Jewish people? When the Jewish people are very great, like in the time of the Tanoim, when they were very great, they were very big Talmidei Chacham. Is that what they're missing? They have to be on a certain madreg, and the answer to that is no. The madreg of the Jews is not a necessary factor in bringing the Mashiach. So what is the necessary factor? The necessary factor is how many sins the Jews do. That's the factor. It's not how much the Jews know. It's not how much the Jews learn. You know what I mean? How much they learn or how much Torah they know. It has to do with the amount of sins that they do. If the Jews do major sins, if the majority of Klal Yisrael, the majority of the Jewish people, do sins and do almost no mitzvahs, the Mashiach still can come. Why? Because there's a certain principle known as unaccountability. When you do a sin, you are responsible for what you did. But if you don't know that what you did was a sin, because you don't know any Torah, let's say, for example, a Jew was brought up by the Goyim. It's a Jew in Soviet Russia at the time of the communists, when he was never allowed to learn Torah because the communists never allowed the Jews to learn Torah. So therefore, all the Jews, the 6 million Jews that lived in Soviet Russia, never learned any Torah. So therefore, they didn't even know what Shabbos is. They didn't know what Kashrut is. They didn't know any of the mitzvahs. So therefore, even though they were responsible for doing the sins, but they were not actually sins, because God does not hold them accountable. So it's not your responsibility if you do sins, it's your accountability. You have to know that what you're doing is a sin. And if you know that it's a sin, then you are responsible. You can be accused of doing the sins. But if you have no idea that what you're doing is a sin, and if you've never learned anything about Shabbos, or that there's such a thing as Shabbos, and you therefore don't keep Shabbos, that is not considered a sin. You are considered a tinuk shenishba. That's considered like a baby who was captured by the goyim, who never learned any Torah. Tinuk shenishba means a baby who was captured by the goyim, and therefore he is unaccountable. So therefore, God can bring the Meshiach in another way, that even if the Jews do not repent, if he sees to it that the Jews become fundamentally tinuk shenishba, if God manipulates history so that the Jews don't know anything anymore. They literally do not know anything anymore because they never learn any Torah like you have today. Today, 93% of the Jewish people don't know anything at all. They don't know Gemara, they don't know Tanakh, they don't know any about Torah. They barely know that there's such a thing as Shabbos and so on, or Kashrus, because their parents are not religious and their parents are not religious. So therefore, the Jews who are really unaccountable cannot be faulted for the sins. And since they cannot be faulted sins, the only sins they can be faulted are sins between man and man. All those sins that have to do between man and God, like Shabbos, keeping kosher, these are sins that have to do between man and God. These sins, they cannot be faulted because they don't know anything. Now, but the sins between man and man, they can be faulted, like theft, murder, Lashon Hara. These are things that they should know because these are sins between man and man. So they should know this. So therefore, they are only accountable for few of the mitzvahs. Most of the mitzvahs in the Torah, they will not be accountable for. They will be considered like ignorant Jews who are totally unaccountable. So God says, in that case, I can still bring the Moshiach, because if they are unaccountable, I can accuse them. That's called the insanity plea. The insanity plea is that if a defendant who is accused of a crime is shown to be insane, he has psychological issues, bordering on psychosis, and so on and so forth, he is not really put in jail. He's sent to a mental hospital and so on and so forth. This is called the insanity plea. And God has given the insanity plea to the Jewish people, so that if they don't know any of the mitzvahs that have to do between him and the Jewish people, they're not considered to be at fault. And therefore the Mashiach can come, because the only thing that really stops the Messianic period is the number of sins that the Jews do. So we see there's another way that the Messianic period can be initiated. It can be initiated simply if most of the Jews in the generation suddenly become completely ignorant of Torah. So either the Jews will keep the Torah, and therefore in that case the Messianic period could start at any time in human history, or it's possible that it start at a certain date. And that date will come if the Jewish people know nothing about Torah, so they are no longer accountable. This is a very powerful principle of the second way that the Mashiach can come. And it says in the Navi, in Yeshaya, how will the Mashiach in the end come? Yeshaya says that the Mashiach will not come because the Jews know what they're doing. The Jews will come because everyone is ignorant. The majority of Jews, over 90% of the Jews, will not know anything about what the Torah is saying. Therefore, they will be unaccountable, and the Mashiach will come then. But for that to happen, the Mashiach will only come by a certain date. That date has to be when, by the time that date arises, most, over 90% of the Jews don't know anything at all. Say it. Now, the question is, why is that date so important? Why is it that the Mashiach can come at a certain date? Why can't he come to the end? Why can't God wait for the Jews till they do repentance? Why can't he do that? And so the Jews repent, and therefore they will be able to bring Mashiach by virtue of the repentance of their deeds. Why does God have to wait almost to the end of history? It is now almost the end of history. It is 5,781 years. The world is supposed to last, according to Chazal, according to the sages, for only 6,000 years. So therefore, 97% of human history has already gone by, and we have not seen any Mashiach at all. Why? Because it turns out that the way God is going to bring the Mashiach is not with the knowledge of the Torah, but with the ignorance of the Torah, with unaccountability. Why does God set a certain date? So I think I can explain this in a certain way. The final end, the final destiny of the Jewish people and all those people who are worthy is called Olam Haba, or the future world. That's a world which is beyond time and beyond space. There is no time, there is no past, present, and future in Olam Haba. But why is it that God... So therefore, in order to be Zocher to Olam Haba, you will no longer have any free will. You only have free will while you're physical in this world. In Olam Haba, in the future world, where there's no time, there's no possibility of free will. Because without time, there's no possibility of change. And if you cannot change, you cannot elevate your status. So therefore, the future world will come at a place time when there is no time. There's no past, present, and future. What is the problem with this at Olam Haba? Because there's a certain level of the future world that if it reaches a certain point where the Jewish people are so ignorant and so backward that they can no longer see the unity of God. The whole concept of Olam Haba is that the future world, which is beyond time, demonstrates the absolute power and unity of God. How? By understanding the deeds of God and what God has done. But there's a possibility that at a certain point, that information is no longer accessible. There's a possibility that the Jewish people can reach a level of ignorance and unaccountability which is beyond the ability to demonstrate God's power and the fact that God is God. So therefore, what happened then is that Olam Haba loses its significance. There's no Olam Haba anymore. There's no future world. There cannot be a future world beyond time. Why? Because people can no longer recognize how God functions in this world to bring all of human history to Olam Haba. So therefore, that is the date that God said that the Meshiac has to come. Mashiach has to come before the X-1000 in a certain date. We do not know that date. This date was only revealed to Jacob, the patriarch, Yaakov Avinu, and it was only revealed to Daniel the prophet. No one else knows that date. And when Jacob wanted to reveal that date to his sons, it was taken away from him and he could not remember it. That date, the reason why that date is chosen, because that represents that beyond that date, the Jewish people will go into a level of unaccountability and a level of ignorance, where even Olam Haba, the future world, is affected and does not reflect the absolute sovereignty of God. So therefore, there will be no time that such a thing is possible. So therefore, the Mashiach must appear before that should become possible. So even though the Jews are completely ignorant of Torah, 93% of the Jews know nothing about Torah. I imagine if they go slightly further on, they will eventually reach the point where even the Olam Haba will have no significance. Therefore, the Mashiach coming must be imminent. And his coming is represented by the 50th gate. That is the light in which he will convert the world to the knowledge of God and so on. Suddenly God will reappear to the world with certain presence, which is called the Shekhinah, and that will appear to the world, and the world will start to suddenly elevate and return to God. And of course, this will be miraculous, but it will be done through the 50th gate. So we understand a lot of concepts that I've just said now. We spoke about the concept of Moshe and the staff, that it represents the 50th gate that he would receive in the Torah at Sinai. We understand the concept of the Egyptians, that they had to leave the Jews go because they could not hold them anymore. We understand that the matter itself is contained in a stone, that therefore it's trapped in a stone, and it can only be released by the Mashiach who is worthy of it, and so on. Finally, we also understand the concept of the Erevav. The Erevav were the ancient Egyptians who decided to come with the Jews when they left Egypt. But what happened was by Sinai, the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude, caused the Jewish people to worship the golden calf, and therefore the Jews lost the opportunity of Moshe Rabbeinu becoming the Meshiach and being able to bring down the 50th gate, which was the Torah. And therefore, human history had to go beyond, and human history has gone so far beyond. We are still trying to acquire the 50th gate, and we have never acquired it. Finally, I've spoken about the two different ways that it's possible for the Meshiach to come. That the Meshiach can come if Klal Yisrael does repentance or knows the Torah, or if the Jewish people in a certain date. And that's because that date corresponds to the last date of Olam Haba, which can contain the absolute sovereignty of God, which they can see. And that's a certain date in which the Mashiach can suddenly appear. Now, with those two pieces of information, I have to go on to the third piece, which is finally the piece that I'm trying to get to. And it has to do with the concept of the Shekhinah and Golus. This is a very deep concept and so on and so forth, and it's very important to understand this. The Shekhinah is the presence of God in this world. The Shekhinah means the presence of God, and the Shekhinah is not God, but it really represents His presence or His energy and so on and so forth. The Shekhinah is what appears in Olam Haba to the Jewish people and to whoever's worthy of it in Olam Haba, because mankind will suddenly become, the Shekhinah will become visible in the sense that every human being, every soul will be able to sense the energy and the power of the Shekhinah, and that will become his Olam Haba. The ability to sense this is the ability to sense the absolute sovereignty of God, and that he will sense, and therefore he will actually be able to unify with God at a certain, in a level of a zivug. In Olam Haba, every soul becomes a zivug, becomes a partner with God in a certain sense, really with the Ein Sof. And that partnership itself is called the ability to recognize the absolute sovereignty of God. And this will be a feeling of absolute ecstasy. And this is what all is called from Olam Haba. Now what happens is that the Jews are not worthy of the Shekhinah, so therefore what happens is the Jews then go into Golus. What is Golus? Golus means that the Jews leave the land of Israel. Well, it means more than that, but basically it means that they leave the land of Israel and they go and live among the Goyim. So the first time that the Jews went into Golus, which is called exile, was in Babylonia, which destroyed the first Beit HaMikdash. At that point, the Jews went to Babylonia, and then from there, they went to Persia, and they came back to Israel, and then they went to Greece, and so on, and finally to Rome. The last Golus that the last exile that the Jews went to was the Golus of Rome, which is Christianity, and that's a Golus that's lasted for 2,000 years. It's only recently we have been able to return from that Golus. Now, the very critical thing happens also. It says that when the Jews go into Golus, when they go into exile, when they leave the land of Israel, and therefore they leave many mitzvahs that have to do with the land of Israel and which cannot be done, and they leave certain levels of Torah. When they leave all of that, it says also that the Shekhinah, the energy or the presence of God, goes into exile with them. That's right. You know, the Shekhinah normally is in the Beit HaMikdash, in the Holy Temple. It resides in the Holy Temple, and when you went to the Holy Temple, when it existed at the previous times, the Shekhinah was there. And you can sense the Shekhinah. You can sense this energy, this divine energy, and it was really world shaking. I mean, suddenly you were stirred up, and you were influenced by this, and you felt tremendously spiritual. When the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, that energy called the Shekhinah went into exile with the Jews. So when the Jews went into Babylonia, the Shekhinah went with them. And when it went into Persia, it went with them, and Greece and Rome. The Shekhinah is now really in the exile of the Jews. And the main exile of the Jews was, for the last 1,000 years, was in Europe. The Jews were in Europe, and the Shekhinah, the presence of God, was with them in Europe. And finally, in the end of them, it's in America itself. When the Shekhinah goes into a foreign nation of Goyim, that nation becomes the greatest nation on earth. Therefore, all the exiles that the Jews experienced themselves became world powers. Babylonia, Persia, Greece, Rome. These were world powers. Why? Because the presence of the Shekhinah, the actual energy of God, was invested in the exile with the Jews, but it was captured by the Goyish nation that held them. And therefore, what happened was that these nations of Goyim are able to control the Jews. The only reason why the Goyim, the Gentiles, are able to control the Jews, who happen to be the holiest nation on earth, is because of their sins. If the Jews did not sin, it would be absolutely impossible for the Goyim to control the Jewish people. And since the Shekhinah goes into the exile with the Jews, the Shekhinah goes to the Goyim, and it gives them partly of its own energy. The energy is called Oizen Teferes. It's the energy of existence. It's the energy of success and the energy of wisdom. And when the Shekhinah goes into Golus, where the Jews are, then that Shekhinah gives over a part of its energy to the Goyim who hold it. And with that energy, the Goyim became the world power nation that it is. The only reason why America is a world power today is because the Shekhinah is in the Golus of the Jews in America and is therefore part of the American foundation. This is a very important concept. Now the next concept, once you understand this, why does the Shekhinah go into Golus with the Jews? And the answer is a very deep answer, which I'm not going to, I spoke about in the past, and I'm not going to really speak about it now, but I'm going to basically say the Shekhinah gives the ability of the Goyim, or of the accusing angel, to capture the Jews and hold them. How do the Jews wind up in Golus, in exile? Because the accusing angel accused the Jews of sins. And this accusation then takes the Shekhinah, which inhabits the Jews, and it goes into exile with them. And then it becomes like a battery. It becomes a battery to the nation that holds them, so it's able to hold them in exile. If the Shekhinah did not go into Golus, the Jews would be annihilated. The only thing that the Jews preserved in Golus, in the exile, is that the Jews are not annihilated because of their sins, is because the Shekhinah went into exile with them. And in the exile, the Shekhinah is like a battery, in a certain sense, which gives energy to the Goyim to be able to hold the Jews in captivity. And when the Jews leave that Golus, and which can only leave the Golus because the Shekhinah has to leave first. That's right. The Shekhinah has to leave the Golus first. And when it leaves the Golus, then the Jews can actually leave the Golus. So the ability of the Jews to leave exile or recapture the temple or whatever it does, tries to recapture, it depends. It can only do this if the Shekhinah, the energy which fortifies the Goyim and fortifies the Goyim to do this, is the Shekhinah is in their midst. It has to leave them in order for this to happen to the Jews. Where is the light of Meshiach? The problem is, where is the light of Meshiach? The answer is that the light of Meshiach, which is the 50th gate, is contained in the Shekhinah. That's right. It is the Shekhinah that holds that light. But when the Shekhinah goes into Golus, then that light goes into Golus. That's right. And therefore, the energy of the 50th gate, which is the Messianic energy, is contained in the Golus of the Shekhinah, where? At the lowest point of that exile. The Shekhinah goes in the Golus, and the more intense the Golus, then the more intense the light of Mashiach is captured. So therefore, we don't have the light of Mashiach. Why? We have lost it. Why? Because that light is in exile with us. But it's with the Goyim, it's hidden amongst the Goyim, and so on and so forth, in a certain way, and we cannot get it. So therefore, the light of Mashiach itself is in the Golus of the Shekhinah. It's in the Golus of our what is our energy in Olam Haba. That's a very critical thing to understand. And the light of Mashiach, the 50th gate, is at the lowest level of that Golus. So therefore, the Shekhinah, in order to release the light of Mashiach and give it to Mashiach, it has to go into its final exile. There's a certain final level of exile in which the Shekhinah will go with the Jews. And the light of Mashiach is in the final exile, because we cannot capture that light until the final exile. And the final exile appears on that date, the Ita, in its time. It appears on this date that the Mashiach has to come. That is the date that the Shekhinah has to leave Golus. The presence of God and the energy of God has to leave the exile. With the Jews then leave the exile, and the light of the Mashiach leaves the exile with the Shekhinah, and then it goes to the Mashiach himself. Then he can capture that light. You have to understand, until the Mashiach can capture the 50th gate, he does not become Mashiach. He is a candidate, that's all. But for the Mashiach to be a designate, not a candidate, but actually become the Mashiach, he has to have access to that light. And that light is in the Golus, in the exile of the Shekhinah with the Jews. And it will not leave until the final date, when the Shekhinah leaves the Golus, the exile of the Jews, and it takes that light with it. Then that light becomes available to the Mashiach. So the Mashiach then becomes a designate. He becomes a Mashiach, and he starts the Messianic period. So you have an idea of the mechanism of all this. All of this is connected. So in other words, what about the matter? What about the matter itself, the staff of most of? What do we see about the matter of the Mashiach? Where is the staff of Mashiach now, and so on? And that's the instant question. Nobody knows where that staff is. But the amazing thing is, and this is the very thing which really is not known at all. But basically, I'm going to say this thing, and I believe this to be true. The staff of Moshe Rabbeinu is hidden, and nobody can use it. Why? Because nobody is able to use the available energy of the staff, which is in the exile of the Shekhinah, except one people. Who is that? That's the Erev Rav. Why? Descendants of the ancient Egyptians. What is the Erev Rav? The Erev Rav are Jewish people themselves. They are Jews. But they are Jews that in some way convince the Jewish people to go against God. Now, who the Erev Rav is, we don't know. We cannot identify them also, but we know that the Erev Rav, they can either be religious Jews or non-religious Jews. Most people think that they are non-religious Jews, and this is not true. There are many religious Jews who can be actually Erev Rav also. But the fundamental characteristic of an Erev Rav, of this people who belong to Erev Rav, is that in some way their association with the Jewish people is they antagonize the Jewish people to go against God. You know, they cause Jewish people to lose their faith or their love of God. You see, and that's what it is. And this is something very specific to the Erev Rav and so on. The fact of the matter is, how does God able to make Jews unaccountable? How does he do it? How does God make 93% of the Jewish people totally ignorant? What he does is, he does it by the Erev Rav. He gives the Jewish people over to their rule. In other words, the non-religious Jews who focus on making Jews unreligious, who take Jewish people away. You know, he focuses on them, and this is Erev Rav, or people who are even sometimes religious, but they make people go away from God and not love Him. The Erev Rav has the job of taking the Jewish people away from Him and making them ignorant. The ignorance and the unaccountable of the Jewish people at the end of time will be caused by the Erev Rav. You see it. And they are the ones to do it. How they do it and so on is a whole discussion which I'm not going to get into right now. But there's one thing you have to know, which is a very great truth. The Erev Rav, because they are the people who, through their efforts, the Jews become unaccountable, even though the Erev Rav want to take the Jewish people and just take away their relationship with God. That's what they want to do. But the Erev Rav is really serving God's purpose, because God wants them to function. God needs the Jewish people to be unaccountable at the end of time so that they can be worthy of Mashiach, since they're not going to repent. In order to do this, he uses the Erevav to do this kind of thing and so on. And the Erevav, of course, thinks that in certain ways they benefit. In their arrogance, they think that they benefit from this, which they don't. But they are doing the specific message of God, and they are responsible for making the Jews unaccountable. And therefore, in a certain sense, they can actually access the staff of Moshe Rabbeinu, right? That in a certain spiritual sense, they can simply put their hands on the staff and they can move its energy. No one else can do this. So therefore, what we see is this, that the staff of the Meshiach, which has to do with the 50th gate, is in the hands. The staff itself is in the hands of the Meshiach himself, who holds on to that staff, but he cannot control it. The Meshiach, who's dead, who's a candidate of every generation, is able to hold on in a certain sense to the staff, but he cannot control it. The staff does not give over its energy. And at the end of time, not only Moshiach himself holds on to that staff, but the Erevav along with him holds on to the staff. And they are both fighting. They are fighting to have domination over the staff. Both the Moshiach himself and the Erevav, specifically the Moshiach ben Yosef and the Erevav, are both fighting to hold on to the staff of Moshe Rabbeinu and to access this Messianic light. But they don't realize that they're doing this. At the end of time, what happens is when the Shekhinah goes out of Golus, that staff will suddenly become fully dominated by the Mashiach. Only the Mashiach will be the one that will be controlling the staff. The ability of the Erevav to control the staff will be suddenly completely cancelled, and they will have no access to the staff itself. And once that happens, then the Mashiach will have total control of that staff, and he will bring the 50th gate, or the light of Mashiach, down to the world, and he will bring the Gula. But this is not going to happen till the Shekhinah goes out of Golus, which means it will not happen. It will almost happen by the end of history itself. Now the question is, when does this date arrive? We don't know exactly when it will arrive, but we can have a certain way to calculate the possibility of approximately when it will arrive. I've once said before that the sin of the Jewish people in this generation and a number of generations before is unique. The sins of the Jews before this was certainly the fact that the Jews did not keep Shabbos, they spoke Lashon Hara. But there's a certain level of sinner, there's a certain level of Jew hatred that Jews can have that are way beyond the purview of sins. And that's called Mesira. When a Jew in some way is responsible so that Goyim themselves have dominion over that Jew, that the Goyim himself have dominion over the Jewish people themselves, if you are a Jew and you side with the Goyim and you side with them to give the Goyim power over the Jews, that's called Mesira. That's called total treachery for a Jew to turn on his own people. And when that happens, that will be the last generation with that date of termination. That will be the last generation which will be on earth before the Mashiach comes. The Mashiach will be there in the last generation when a lot of Jewish people will turn into Moisim. Again, a Mois is someone who gives over the energy, the life, or the wealth of a Jew, and he's captured by the Goyim, and they're able to destroy him or cause great havoc among them. So therefore, he sides with the Goyim. That's called a Moisa. And that will probably be that level of Mesir, when many Jews will be Moisrim and so on. That level of Jew will be the one that will be present to a large extent at the final generation itself. So we have to ask ourselves, when is this generation? What is that generation? And the fact of the matter is that if you really think about it, this generation has fundamentally been reached. We have actually reached that generation of Mesira. And how is that? In a certain way, that has to do with the basic the election results of the elections. When you look at the deeds of Biden, is an absolute miracle that so many Americans voted for someone who is cognitively declined. At least 20% of Biden is cognitively declined, and therefore his mind is not there. And for them to vote for a person like that, who not only is cognitively declined and doesn't have his full of mind, to be the president of the United States and be the head of 320 million Americans is absolute Meshiac. To give over the president, the power of America, to such a person is Meshiac, because a person like that cannot be a leader. In addition to that, and so on and so forth, he represents the radical left. And the radical left wants to change the complete nature of America. Now, I'm not going to go into this too much, but fundamentally, if the radical left takes over America, because if they take over both houses of Congress and they take over America, they will take over the whole American culture. They will cancel the Constitution. They will cancel the Electoral College. They will cancel the concept of filibuster. They will cancel the Supreme Court by filling the Supreme Court with many more justices, and so on and so forth. They will see to it so that they will become the dominant party of America forever. And therefore they will give America tremendous entitlements, and they will bankrupt America eventually. And if they bankrupt America, they will in a certain sense be responsible for the annihilation of the world, because America is the last super cop in the world. It's the only reason why many dictators don't play what they want to do. They are afraid of America. And therefore the radical left, and so on and so forth, is responsible for this thing, which in a sense Biden was connected to. So therefore we see a tremendous thing here. We see that there's a possibility in our generation that a radical left will change the face of America as it's been for hundreds of years. They will change the Constitution. That is considered Meshiac, because that will destroy the world. It will destroy the world, not even the Jews. It will destroy the Goyim. It will destroy Eretz Yisrael, and so on and so forth, because of the what they will do to Iran and so on. So in a certain sense, we see that we have reached a generation where the whole American culture will collapse. And this is impossible. Everyone is looking at America, and nobody can believe what's happening. That the radical left is actually in a position to take over America and change the face of America. And therefore, anyone who voted for Biden has made that possible. So there's a real question of Meshiac, which is the highest level of unaccountability. And that's a big question of it and so on. I'm not going to go into that question of whether these people have Olam Haba or not. But they have put the entire world and America in very serious danger because of this. Now, why is it that, God has chosen Biden to become a president-elect? Biden is not the president at all. He's a president-elect. What does that mean? That doesn't mean anything. He does not have the powers of president. Trump is still a president, and he still has the power. But many people have given Biden the possibility of becoming a president. So they put the entire world in a certain state of jeopardy by giving over the president to someone who's cognitively declined, doesn't have his full mind, and the radical left, who represents a completely opposite culture that the Constitution says. This is the last status of the Shekhinah. This is the last generation of the Shekhinah, because this Golus, this exile that the Shekhinah is in with the Jews in America, is the final exile itself, because it represents the final disappearance of the world itself, the possible disappearance of the world itself. But I believe the reason why this happened and so on and so forth is because the actual possibility of the Geula did not materialize until this generation. Because only a generation which can give the complete destruction of the world through the loss of America, or the loss of its treasury, and so on and so forth. So America cannot be the major policeman of the world. By taking away this possibility for America, they have put the world in the hands of a radical left, which can destroy the world itself. And therefore I believe that this probably is the last generation. And we have to reach this point. Why? Because that's where the 50th gate is. As I've told you, the 50th gate is now controlled by the Erev Rav, by the mixed multitude, and the Moshiach himself, who are having a hand-to-hand battle spiritually between the control of the Smata. And this Mata now is in a battle between them, and it's about to go over to the Mashiach, because the Shekhinah is about to leave this last generation, which represents the worst generation of all, and so on and so forth. It's true there's been generations so very bad before. There was generations, of course, the Holocaust, which is terrible. But this generation represents a greater danger than the Holocaust represents, because in the Holocaust did not represent basically the elimination of America. America fought World War II and won, and was not possibly that. And America was still a country that was very strong. But in our times, with this election of the radical left and Biden, you have the possibility where America will disappear. And in a certain sense, it represents the end. The real end of possibly of mankind is set. This reset in which they're all talking about is a very great danger to the human race. This probably is the last generation, and this therefore is the generation in which the staff of Moshe Rabbeinu will become visible again. It's in this generation, which is in the exile of the Shekhinah, which is the last exile of the Shekhinah itself, the generation where Jews are most unaccountable, which is this generation. And this generation will therefore see the freedom of that staff. Now, I'm not exactly sure exactly when that will happen. It's still contested whether Biden will capture the election itself. It's not simple, and I'm not going to go into this and so on and so forth. But since this is the basic concept of what's going on, therefore, this is the issue at stake. And therefore, I believe that the reason why Biden won the votes, at least up to now, is because he had to win that, because he had to go to the last generation, which the Shekhinah was in exile. And from that last generation, the staff will go of Moshe Rabbeinu will be free. Because when the Shekhinah leaves the Golus, when it leaves the exile, the whole world will change over. When the Moshiach arrives, the entire world will change over in a way which will be absolutely astounding. And it will be done suddenly and in a very quick order. And it will go on to the Madriga of Olam Haba, which is another discussion. So that's why I believe that all this has happened till now, that we have gone down to the last Madriga, the last level of exile, so that the Shekhinah is at that level, and that from that level, the Shekhinah will leave exile along with the 50th gate, along with the staff, and it will then go to the Meshiach. And as soon as the Meshiach has total control over that staff, he will then be like Moshe Rabbeinu was by Egypt. He will go to power and say, "Let my people go, because you have to let them go. You no longer have any energy." The Goyim do not realize it, but they are only inches away from losing all their power that they have in this world. And when that happens, then we will see the Geula itself. So it's nothing for it. The only thing that we have to do is we have to sit and wait for God to actually produce this as an actual reality itself. And this, I believe, is the explanation of why we have come so far. And we have come so far where we have a generation of people who are Messiah, of people who are endangering the whole planet. And why we have to go so far? Because that's the last generation which the Jews are unaccountable. And it's the last generation which the Shekhinah is in exile. And it's in the last generation which the Erevav will hold us. And it's the last generation which the Meshiach itself, his staff, his flight, that he will control the world, is in captivity. And this is what I think, and it's something that we have to hold, and we all have to have Amunah. The only thing I say to you, to all the people who are listening to this share, that you have to have Amunah. Tzadik be'emunah seyichya. You have to believe that God knows fundamentally what He is doing, and He is trying to save every Jew that He can save in whatever way possible. He was trying to save the Jews through their deeds, but if He can't save them through their deeds, He's going to save them through what? Through their unaccountability. But in any case, what God is trying to do is to save the Jews. We have to have faith in God. We have to trust in the Tochen. We have to trust in His will and His desire to do good and to bring the Jewish people to an ultimate thing, and also non-Jews. Those non-Jews will be worthy of Olam Haba, will also get Olam Haba. So this is not only a situation for Jews. This is a situation for all those righteous Gentiles, those righteous Goyim, who are also part of this process. We have to believe in Him. We have to have Amunah. We have to have the belief that this is the intention of God, to bring Olam Haba, to bring a new universe, which will bring the ultimate light of the Meshiac, the ultimate light of Olam Haba to the world, and when mankind will finally elevate to the highest level possible.